The MSI Prestige 15 is a thin and light laptop with a lower powered 1650 Max-Q GPU inside, but it's got Thunderbolt 3, so just how well does the new 10th gen CPU perform with an external GPU enclosure? I've tested 10 games at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K to find out. The enclosure that I'm using is the Mantis Venus, which I've previously covered in another video. Basically, you plug in your graphics card, then connect the enclosure to a laptop using Thunderbolt 3. My enclosure also provides enough power to run the Prestige 15, so I literally just need to connect a single cable for this setup. The Prestige 15 that I'm testing with has an Intel i7-10710U Comet Lake CPU, so 6 cores and 12 threads. There's 16GB of DDR4 2666 memory and dual channel, and it's also got Nvidia GTX 1650 Max-Q graphics. As you may have seen in my game testing video, it could only really play modern games at lower settings. So let's see how we can improve performance with an external GPU enclosure. I've tested games with both the laptop GPU and laptop screen at 1080p, and with the eGPU and external monitor at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K resolutions. I haven't bothered testing with the laptop's own screen with the eGPU, mostly because this results in lower performance, as the signal has to go back from the eGPU over Thunderbolt and get processed by the Intel graphics on the laptop. This step is avoided by running the game directly on an external screen, resulting in increased performance. Anyway, enough explanation, let's check out some game results. We'll look at temperature and clock speed differences afterwards. Control was tested by running through the same section near the start of the game with the high setting preset. I have the results from just the laptop only down the bottom, then the rest of the results from the eGPU and external screen. In this case, even at 4K with the eGPU, we're seeing better performance than what the 1650 Max-Q is capable of providing at 1080p. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the built-in benchmark, and again, the results here are following a similar trend, where even at the highest setting preset, the eGPU performance at 4K is outperforming the laptop standalone at 1080p. Ghost Recon Breakpoint was tested with the built-in benchmark, again similar sort of pattern. At 1440p, the eGPU was able to give us above 60 FPS in this test, even with very high settings in use. And 4K with the eGPU is doing better than the laptop only at 1080p. Battlefield 5 was tested in campaign mode. At ultra settings, the game wasn't playable on the 1650 Max-Q graphics. But to be fair, it did work okay at low and medium settings. With the eGPU though, playing maxed out at Ultra became possible, with above 60 FPS being hit at both 1080p and 1440p. And the 1% lows are higher than even the average from the laptop by itself. Borderlands 3 was tested with the built-in benchmark. Yet again, even the 1% low from the 4K result was ahead of the average FPS that the 1650 Max-Q could provide. Even with ultra settings, we're going from essentially unusable frame rates to something that should work quite well. The Witcher 3 was tested at ultra settings, and tends to be pretty GPU heavy. It didn't play too well on the 1650 Max-Q. Then with the eGPU and same 1080p resolution, we're able to improve average FPS by 137%, and even 1440p was now quite playable. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was tested with the built-in benchmark. As this is a CPU-heavy test, there's less of a difference between the results here when compared against the other games. That said though, the 4K result was still scoring better average FPS than the 1650 Max-Q at 1080p, and that's despite the performance loss from the Thunderbolt overhead. Rainbow Six Siege was tested with the game's built-in benchmark at ultra settings with a 100% render scale. This title is less demanding compared to the others tested, so the results from the laptop's GPU weren't too bad here. But as you can see, much higher was possible when we offload this to the eGPU. CSGO was tested with the Theoretical FPS benchmark. At max settings on the laptop only, it was able to hit 150 FPS. Which in isolation should be enough to play okay, but we could double this at the same resolution with the eGPU and external screen. Far Cry New Dawn was tested with the built-in benchmark. The results with the eGPU at 1080p and 1440p were similar due to a CPU bottleneck, as the test hits the CPU harder. In any case, this was another game where the 4K result with the eGPU beat the laptop's 1650 Max-Q, both in terms of average FPS and 1% low. These are the differences between running the games at 1080p on the 1650 Max-Q and on the eGPU with the 2080 Ti. With these specific games and this particular graphics card, the eGPU was on average 135% faster than playing the same games on the laptop without the eGPU. A big factor is of course the graphics card being used in the eGPU, which is why I'll be testing out a whole heap of different cards in a future video, so make sure you're subscribed for that. It also really depends on the game. CPU heavier titles like Assassin's Creed, Far Cry New Dawn, and CSGO are at the bottom of the graph, though they still saw fair boosts. If you recall from my thermal testing on the Prestige 15, when under combined CPU and GPU load, the 90W power brick seemed to be the limiting factor preventing us from reaching higher CPU clock speeds. As the laptop's 1650 Max-Q graphics is essentially idle when using the eGPU, in theory there should be more power for the CPU to perform better when the eGPU is in use. These are the clock speeds while gaming with Watch Dogs 2, and with combined CPU and GPU stress tests being run using Ada64 and the Heaven benchmark at the same time to fully load the system. We can see that when the eGPU is used, the CPU clock speeds rise up as expected. There's more power available for the CPU to perform better. So some of our performance improvement in the games shown before isn't just due to the fact I'm using the 2080 Ti, but also because the CPU can stretch its legs. The temperatures follow a similar pattern. When the CPU is able to perform better, it runs better as a result, thermal throttling intermittently at 95 degrees with the eGPU in this worst case stress test, though it was okay in the actual game. As the 1650 Max-Q shares heat pipes with the CPU, it still reports temperatures just below 60 degrees, despite being essentially idle. Is this a practical solution? For most people, no, not really. The MSI Prestige 15 I've got here goes for around $1,400 US. You can find updated prices to everything I'm using linked in the description. The GPU enclosure goes for around $200 to $300, while the 2080 Ti is around $1,300 US. So around the price of a mid-range gaming laptop. If you add on an external display, mouse and keyboard, then we're more than doubling the cost of just the laptop only. You could of course use a cheaper GPU. You don't have to use the 2080 Ti. I just wanted to show the biggest improvement. This is why this is impractical for most people. If you've got money to burn and want a super portable laptop that you can just connect up to the external graphics with one cable when you get home to run games, then this might be the setup for you. For most people though, it would be cheaper and make more sense to have the lower powered thin and light laptop for travel, than have a mid-range gaming PC at home, which is why I think the eGPU enclosure is a niche solution. It really seems to come down to how important having the single machine is to you. Let me know your thoughts on an external GPU setup like this down in the comments. Would this be something you'd go for? Or would you just use a cheaper laptop and gaming PC instead? Whatever your preference, if you're new to the channel, consider getting subscribed for future tech videos like this one.